The December air was chilly, the green trees retaining their leaves despite the arrival of winter. The small chapel was packed with about 300 people, all dressed in black, so silent that only the gentle hum of the ventilation system could be heard. There was no coffin. Instead, there was a large photograph of Dean Martin, his familiar half-smile, a martini in his hand, his king of cool gaze still fixed on the audience. Beside it were Italian flags and pristine white flowers. Don Rickles, 69, sat in the third row. His hand clutched the funeral program until it was crumpled. Barbara, his wife, sat beside him, gently placing her hand on his shoulder. Don Rickles, Mr. Warmth, merchant of venom, the man who never stopped talking throughout his 40-year career. The man who had angered Frank Sinatra, Ronald Reagan, and a host of Rat Pack stars on national television. Today, he was silent. When his name was called, Don rose. His steps were heavy, devoid of the agility of a comedian. He walked to the microphone, paused. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The entire chapel held its breath. Don, Rickles, Barbara, watched her husband, her eyes reddening. Don said nothing. His jaw was clenched, his gaze fixed on the space above everyone's heads. His hands hung limply at his sides, devoid of their usual mocking gestures. It wasn't a moment of a comedian losing his composure. It was a moment of an unnamed debt, a friendship deeper than anyone could have imagined watching the Dean Martin show, and a truth about Dean Martin, the real person behind the cool facade and lazy smile. Back in 1957, Miami Beach. Don Rickles was performing in a small nightclub, the audience sparse, his act too crude for the times. Frank Sinatra walked in. Instead of being shy, Rickles blurted out, "Make yourself at home, Frank. Hit somebody." Sinatra nearly fell off his chair laughing. From then on, Sinatra started bringing friends to see Rickles. The door to a career opened. But the person who built the whole room behind that door was Dean Martin. From the mid-1960s, Rickles became the most frequent guest on the Dean Martin Show, a 9-season show, one of the most watched in America. Dean didn't just invite him once, he invited him repeatedly, year after year. Not because it was easy, but because Dean understood exactly what Rickles was doing. Insult comedy needed a host who not only endured, but actually enjoyed being destroyed in front of the public. Dean Martin, the Italian-American Dino Paul Crocetti from Steubenville, Ohio, cultivated an image of invincibility. With a glass of wine in hand and a half-smile, he responded to every taunt with a shrug. Go ahead. When Rickles attacked Dean on live television, Dean laughed so hard he practically fell off his chair. The audience understood immediately. This was love, not an attack. Dean had created a safe space for Rickles to shine. In the later Celebrity Roast series, 1973 to 1984, Dean sat in the center, letting Rickles do whatever he wanted. Dean never demanded payment, never mentioned the debt. That was Dean's way of showing friendship. Silent, steadfast, and unconditional. Beyond the spotlight, their friendship was simpler. They made each other laugh effortlessly. In 1969, during a Western sketch on Dean's show, Rickles played a bartender, and Dean walked in and ordered milk. Rickles immediately exclaimed, "He deserves an Oscar for reading that line." Dean was taken aback, his face showing genuine emotion for a moment before his professional smile returned. The two looked at each other, not comedian and host, but true friends. They shared late-night dinners in Las Vegas, road trips on Route 66, and stories about their families. Dean, despite his famous playboy image, was actually a devoted father, even though his marriage had been turbulent. Rickles, with his sharp Brooklyn accent, was a good listener. But behind Dean's smile lay deep pain. In 1987, Dean's son, Paul Martin, a 35-year-old pilot, died when his F-4 Phantom crashed into Mount San Gorgonio. Dean was devastated. He withdrew from the Together Again tour with Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. The public only saw Dean is still cool, but in reality, he silently endured it alone. Rickles was one of the few people Dean allowed close contact in his final years. He often visited Dean in Beverly Hills, bringing old stories to make Dean laugh. "Old man, are you still drinking martinis? Or have you switched to milk like in the sketch from back then?" Dean would laugh, but his eyes were distant. Dean Martin died on Christmas morning 1995 from acute respiratory failure due to lung cancer and emphysema, a consequence of decades of smoking and performing. He was 78, passed away in a quiet home in Beverly Hills, not on stage. The news spread, shaking Hollywood. Frank Sinatra was too grief-stricken to attend, so Barbara Sinatra represented him. Jerry Lewis flew back from Denver, abandoning his role as Damn Yankees. Bob Newhart, Shirley MacLaine, Angie Dickinson, Robert Stack, all were present. The Rat Pack was gradually falling apart. Peter Lawford in 1984, Sammy Davis Jr. in 1990, and now Dean. Rickles sat at the kitchen table until 2 a.m. 2 nights before the funeral, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Barbara asked him what he was doing, trying to think of something to say. "What's the problem?" He was silent for a long time before replying. "Everything I have is wrong." Back in the chapel. After more than 30 seconds of silence, Don Rickles took a deep breath. His voice trembled, no longer sharp with insulting comedy. "Dean, you're the only bastard who can silence me. For 30 years I cursed you on television and you laughed. I thought I was the merchant of venom, but you were the one who gave me space to breathe. You never demanded, never boasted. You just were there, with that stupid smile." His voice broke. "When your son passed away, I saw you fall apart, but you still smiled at me. Today, I have no jokes, no venom, only thank you. Thank you for giving me friendship. Thank you for being Dean Martin." The entire chapel was in tears. Jerry Lewis bowed his head. Barbara Sinatra wiped her eyes. Don Rickles, for the first time in his career, cried in public, not acting, but real. It was a debt repaid, not with words, but with rare sincerity. In the 1960s, Las Vegas was the entertainment capital of the world. Neon lights blazed on the Strip, the clanging of casinos filled the air, and cigarette smoke billowed through showrooms. Dean Martin, with his everlasting Martini, was the king of the Sands Hotel. Don Rickles, already famous thanks to Sinatra's introduction, frequently flew from New York to Nevada to perform. One July night in 1965, after Dean's show, the two sat at the corner of the Copa Room bar. Dean wore a white suit, his tie loose, his eyes slightly droopy from the alcohol. Rickles, with his sharp Brooklyn accent, pointed at Dean. "Dean, you're the only Italian I know who drinks wine like it's tap water. Without you, I'd still be yelling in those small clubs in Miami, where the audience throws beer bottles at my face." Dean chuckled softly, his legendary half-smile. He shrugged. "Go ahead, Don. Hit me with your best shot. But remember, I'll roast you again tomorrow." They laughed out loud. It wasn't a show. It was genuine friendship. Dean understood better than anyone that Rickles' insult comedy wasn't hatred, but a way of showing respect. On those nights, they shared family stories. Dean talked about his children, about his tumultuous marriage to Jean. Rickles talked about Barbara, his wife who had endured his merchant of venom persona. Outside, the Rat Pack, Frank, Sammy, Joey, also joined in. But there was a special bond between Dean and Don. Dean never let Rickles be isolated. When Frank sometimes got irritated by Rickles's jokes, Dean always intervened. "Frank, let him go. Don is the only guy who makes me laugh genuinely." The Vegas scene in those years was like something out of a movie. Convertible Cadillacs gliding down the street, women in glittering gowns, and two friends laughing and joking until late at night. Dean taught Rickles how to be cooler on stage, while Rickles helped Dean rediscover his laughter when family tragedy struck. From 1965 to 1974, The Dean Martin Show was a television phenomenon. Dean invited Rickles almost every season. Not just any guest, Rickles was his secret weapon. Imagine a 1967 episode. Dean, dressed in a smoking hat, stands in the middle of the NBC studio stage. Rickles walks out, points directly at Dean. "Dean Martin, you're the only Italian I know who can fall asleep in the middle of singing. Look, your eyes are half closed as if you're dreaming about your 10th martini." Dean throws his head back, laughing hysterically, almost falling off his chair. The audience erupts in applause. Dean replies in drawn-out Italian. "Don, you're right, but at least I know how to drink. You only know how to swear." The funniest sketches are when they act together. In a Western sketch, Rickles is a bartender. Dean walks in and orders a glass of milk. Rickles' eyes widen. "Milk? Dean Martin drinks milk. That's an Oscar for Best Actor." Dean looked at the camera, shrugged helplessly, and the whole studio burst into laughter. Behind the camera, Dean said to Rickles, "Don, you've made me young again. Hollywood is full of lies, but with you, I know it's real." Rickles, rarely serious, nodded. "You've given me a stage to be myself. Thanks, you bastard." The subsequent roast episodes were even more outrageous. In 1974, Rickles roasted Dean Martin, the host. He teased everyone on the show, but especially Dean. "Dean, you're the reason Italians are considered lazy. You sit there with a glass of wine, laughing, and all of America thinks Italy is paradise." Dean laughed heartily, his eyes sparkling, not acting, but genuine joy from friendship. 1987 was a fateful year. Dean Paul Martin, Dean's son, an F-4 Phantom pilot, crashed in San Gorgonio. The news struck Dean like a bolt of lightning. He sat in his Beverly Hills home, silent for hours. Gene tried to comfort him, but Dean retreated into his king of cool persona. Rickles was one of the few people Dean allowed to visit. He flew from Los Angeles and knocked on Dean's door. Dean opened it, his eyes red but trying to smile. "Don, you came to roast me at this moment." Rickles didn't tease. He sat down, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "No, I'm just here with you today. Want a drink?" They sat for hours, not saying much. Dean talked about his son, about their flights together. Rickles listened for the first time in his life, not seeking a sarcastic remark. "Dean, you're stronger than anyone, but don't keep it to yourself," Rickles said. Dean nodded, his eyes glancing out at the backyard. "Thanks, Don. You're the only guy who didn't pretend to pity me." From then on, Rickles visited often. Short trips on the old Route 66, stopping at roadside diners, Dean driving his Cadillac. Rickles telling old stories to make Dean laugh. Hollywood only saw Dean performing occasionally, but Rickles knew the real pain. In the 1990s, Dean lived a more secluded life. Lung cancer began to gnaw at him, but he still kept his smile. Rickles, now older, still called and visited regularly. One afternoon in 1993, at Dean's house, the two old men sat on the porch looking at the garden. Rickles held a glass of water. He drank less alcohol. Dean held a martini. "Remember the milk sketch, Dean? I still think you deserved an Oscar because I read that line." Rickles laughed. Dean laughed back. "And you're still merchant of venom. But to me, you're the real Mr. Warmth." They talked about the old Rat Pack. Sammy had passed away in 1990. Frank was getting weaker. Dean sighed. "We're getting old, Don. But at least I have you." Rickles squeezed his friend's hand. "And I have you. For 30 years, you've never abandoned me on stage or in real life." Those moments were simple but profound. They didn't need the glitz and glamour of showbiz. Just two friends, laughter mixed with sadness, and a silent understanding. On Christmas morning, 1995, Dean Martin passed away peacefully in his Beverly Hills home. News spread quickly. Hollywood was shaken. Rickles received a phone call in the middle of the night. Barbara embracing her husband as he sat numbly at his desk. 2 days later, Rickles sat in his office, a blank sheet of paper before him. He wrote and rewrote the eulogy, but none of the lines felt right. "How do I roast Dean now? How do I tease him one last time?" Barbara advised. "Speak from the heart, Don." The funeral was approaching. Pierce Brothers' Westwood Village Memorial Park was packed. Jerry Lewis flew in from Denver, dropping out of the role. Frank Sinatra couldn't attend. Barbara Sinatra represented him. Shirley MacLaine, Bob Newhart, Angie Dickinson, all were there. Rickles sat in the third row, clutching the funeral program. His heart pounded. This wasn't a stage. This was a real farewell. Pierce Brothers, Westwood Village Memorial Park. Morning of December 28th, 1995. Weak winter sunlight filtered through the ancient trees, illuminating the polished wooden benches. About 300 people sat in silence, the atmosphere heavy, like a thick fog. A large photograph of Dean Martin stood at the front, a half smile, a martini in hand, his hair neatly combed as if still singing, "That's Amore." White flowers and Italian flags surrounded him. There was no coffin because Dean wanted to rest in peace. Jerry Lewis rose first, his voice trembling as he recounted his early days with Dean in 1946 in Atlantic City. He wept as he spoke of Dean helping him through a crisis. Next came Barbara Sinatra, speaking on behalf of Frank. "Dean was a brother, always cool, always there." Shirley MacLaine spoke of the Rat Pack nights, and Angie Dickinson wiped away tears as she called Dean a wonderful father despite a life full of ups and downs. Don Rickles sat in the third row, clutching a crumpled note. Barbara Rickles held her husband's hand and whispered, "Speak from the heart, Don. Dean will want that." Rickles nodded, but a storm raged inside him. For 30 years he had been the merchant of venom, but today, the venom seemed to have vanished. When the MC called his name, Rickles rose. His steps were heavy on the red carpet. He walked to the microphone and paused. A long silence ensued. The entire chapel held its breath. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. His eyes were red, his jaw clenched. There were no more sarcastic gestures, no more familiar half-smile. Rickles took a deep breath, his voice trembling but clear, devoid of the sharpness of insult comedy. "Dean, you're the only bastard in the world who can shut me up. For 30 years I've cursed you on television, in roasts, on Vegas stages. I called you lazy, an Italian who drinks like water, the king of cool who just reclines and laughs. And you just laugh, you give me space, you never get angry, never demand I stop. You're a true friend." His voice broke, tears streaming down his cheeks. The first time Don Rickles had cried in public. "When Dean Paul passed away in 1987, I saw you fall apart. Hollywood thought you were still cool, but I knew how much pain you were in. You still smiled at me, still invited me to your house, still drove your Cadillac on the old Route 66 just so two old guys could reminisce. You never asked for friendship, but you gave me everything. The whole family wept." Jerry Lewis bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. Barbara Sinatra wiped her eyes. Rickles continued, "Dean, thank you for opening the door for me. Thank you for the Sands Hotel nights, the Dean Martin Show episodes, the silly milk sketches that made you laugh so hard. You're not just a star. You're a father, a husband, a friend. Today, Merchant of Venom has no venom. Only goodbye and love. He paused, wiping his face. Silence fell. Then applause erupted, slow, warm. It wasn't applause for comedy. It was for genuine friendship. Standing at the microphone, Rickles let memories flood back. In 1968, after a show in Vegas, Dean invited him to drive his convertible Cadillac down Route 66 toward Arizona. The sun set, casting a fiery red glow over the desert, and dust swirled in the wind. They stopped at Cactus Rose Diner, a small roadside diner with flashing neon lights. Dean ordered a hamburger and a martini. Rickles teased, "You're a star eating here. Hollywood would laugh their heads off." Dean laughed. "Don, this is the real thing. No flashing lights, no script." They sat for hours, Dean recounting his childhood in Steubenville, his longing for his children. Rickles listened, telling stories of being pelted with objects by fans at small clubs. Another time, in 1975, after Dean Paul had grown up, the two took their family to Tucson. Dean taught his son how to drive, and Rickles played the role of the grumpy uncle, making the children laugh uncontrollably. These simple moments were the thread that connected them, transcending the glitz and glamour of showbiz. The funeral ended, and everyone left one by one. Rickles stood outside the chapel, the cold December wind blowing through. Jerry Lewis approached and hugged him. "Don, you said it so well. Dean would be proud." Two old Rat Pack men stood there, sharing their grief. Bob Newhart patted Rickles on the shoulder. "You weren't a comedian today. You were a true friend." Barbara Rickles drove her husband home to Beverly Hills. On the way, Rickles silently looked out the window, remembering the last time she visited Dean. November 1995. Dean was weak, lying on the couch, still holding a small martini. "Don, can you still curse me?" Dean asked weakly. Rickles smiled through her tears. "I curse all the time, you bastard. But this time I just want to say, I love you, my friend." In the days following the funeral, Rickles sat in his office, looking at old photos with Dean. He decided to write a small book about friendship, not comedy, but true stories. "Dean taught me that behind venom lies warmth," he told Barbara. The legacy of Dean Martin and Don Rickles lives on. A friendship that transcends insult comedy, the pain of loss and the passage of time. In the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, they are proof that true laughter comes from the heart. Rickles continued his career, but every time he took the stage, he always observed a moment of silence in memory of Dean, the friend who gave him everything. That story of friendship reminds us, sometimes the person who makes us laugh the most is also the one who heals the deepest wounds.